Daniel chapter 8. The Perspectives of History. In the 3rd year of the reign of King Belshazzar, chapter 8, verse 1, another vision came to Daniel, one concerning the 2nd and 3rd empires. The vision was thus prior in time to the events of Daniel chapter 5. The locale of the vision is Shushan or Susa, the chief capital of the Persian Empire in its days of power. Daniel chapter 8 verse 2 and chapter 8 verse 16 make clear that the entire vision, from the days of Medo-Persian power through Antiochus Epiphanes, is from Shushan, a striking fact in that the centre of the stage, as far as action is concerned, is only briefly Shushan. The perspective, therefore, is Shushan, because the faith and philosophy of that fortress and seat of empire remained the perspective of its successors until Rome appeared in the scene. The organic conception of kingship and its assertion of the continuity of people with king and of king with the divine is thus the governing principle of this vision, since this concept came into clearest focus in the Medo-Persian Empire and governed subsequent empires, also influencing Rome to a marked degree. However, in Rome, despite the very marked Oriental influences, the legalistic principle triumphed as the abiding factor in subsequent Western and now world history, although not without conflict, in that both concepts were transmitted to and through Rome. The Greek contempt of Persian power was stated by Plutarch in his comments in his life of Artaxerxes II. The Persian king and his empire were mighty indeed in gold and luxury, and women, but otherwise were a mere show and vain display. Much of this contempt was based on envy, and the Greeks were not only concerned with conquest in the East, but also with power in terms of that golden East. Thus, Alexander and his 4 successors took over the Medo-Persian concept of kingship to a notable degree. Plutarch cited a pointed example of the extremes to which the Persian concept of kingship was carried. Artaxerxes II married his own daughter, Atossa, declaring her to be his lawful wife, overriding all the principles and the laws by which the Greeks hold themselves bound, and regarding himself as divinely appointed for a law to the Persians, and the supreme arbitrator of good and evil. These same ends, the overriding of good and evil by man the lawgiver, and the deification of man, were also the ultimate goals of Roman legalism, but the Persian concept sought it in the organic unity of society in the God-King, the Roman heirs in the legal rights of individual man, for whose sake law, government, and society exist. Daniel saw the Medo-Persian Empire as a ram, and the 2 horns were high, but one was higher than the other, and the higher came up last. Chapter 8, verse 3. According to Kyle, in Bundahesh, the guardian spirit of the Persian kingdom appears under the form of a ram with clean feet and sharp-pointed horns, and according to Marcel 19.1, the Persian king, when he stood at the head of his army, bore, instead of the diadem, the head of a ram. The power of this empire Daniel saw expanding markedly in every direction, save the east. He did according to his will and became great. Chapter 8, verse 4. Quote, his will, end quote, Young has pointed out, means he did exactly as he wished, indicating arbitrary, despotic power. However, a he-goat arises, Alexander the Great, who, Young observes, came to be known as he of the 2 horns, for he had himself represented with 2 horns to prove he was a son of the ram-headed Ammon of Libya. Ammon, or Ammon of Egypt and Libya, also identified with Jupiter and Zeus by the classical writers, was represented either by a seated figure of a man with a ram's head or an entire ram of blue. In his honour, the flesh of the ram was abstained from by the inhabitants of the Thebaid. His name appears on Egyptian monuments as Am or Amre. Ammon, the sun. The Ammon of Thebes had simply a human form, was called King of the Gods, and was virtually identified in one cult with the sun, in another with the Egyptian Pan. Judgment is pronounced on him in Jeremiah chapter 46, verse 25. Behold, I will punish the multitude of Ammon, of No. The he-goat was an ancient deity, or symbol of deity, as Leviticus chapter 17, verse 7 indicates, being the, quote, devils, end quote, whom the Israelites worshipped in the wilderness. The he-goat cult existed in Egypt, was present in Pan worship, and was a recognized symbol of the Macedonian nation. Coins of Archelaus, king of Macedon, 413 BC, represent on the reverse side a he-goat, and, much later, the conquest by Alexander of Persia is represented on a gem by an engraving of two heads united at their occipits, the one that of a ram, the other that of a one-horned goat. Thus, Alexander was the great horn and founder of the Macedonian Empire and the transmitter of the Persian Empire's life and rationale by his absorption of that faith into his own structure. The presumptuous and arrogant power of Alexander is depicted in chapter 8, verse 8. He waxed very great, or powerful, and successful in his own sight. The anger of the Greeks, chapter 8, verse 7, was also notable, and the desire to overthrow Persia equated with an attempt to redress history. However, in the midst of his power, Alexander was broken, dying at the age of 33, and the empire divided among four notable ones. Chapter 8, verse 8, the four generals, a fifth, Antigonus, being only defeated at Ipsus, 301 BC, so that, 20 years after Alexander's death in 323 BC, the kingdom fell to four generals. Lysimachus took Thrace and Bithynia, and possibly all of Asia Minor. Cassandra gained Macedonia and Greece. Ptolemy took Egypt's and contiguous territories, and Seleucus gained Syria, Babylon, and the eastern countries as far as India. Out of the Syrian power some generations later, from insignificance to great power and exaltation, went forth one horn from littleness, and it became exceeding great. This was Antiochus IV, Theos, Epiphanes, Nicephorus, as he called himself, reigning from 175 to 164 BC. Antiochus began life as a hostage of Rome, had little faith in any god save the Roman war god, and fortresses were his true temples. His policy with regard to the Jews seems inconsistent in view of his usually liberal method of procedure, but it sprang out of a passionate desire to consummate his concept of the state, the union of people and king as a divine and organic unity, the king himself manifesting this deity in his own person, the focus of historical and divine process. It is not surprising that Jerusalem and the pleasant land, or better, the desire, chapter 8, verse 9, as Canaan was called, Ezekiel chapter 20, verse 6, compared Jeremiah chapter 3, verse 19, Daniel chapter 11, verses 16 and 41, should draw his attention, in that its faith was a radical offence to every aspect of his own philosophy. The Jews were in process of being Hellenized in terms of this Syrian Hellenism, and might have been radically syncretized, had not Antiochus supported flagrant corruption and murder by the Hellenistic priests. Antiochus Epiphanes, called also Epimanes, the insane by parody, sought to, quote, stamp, end quote, out every trace of biblical faith. Chapter 8, verses 10 and 11, ordering the adoption of Greek religion, consecrating, in December 168 BC, the Temple of Jehovah in Jerusalem to the Olympian Zeus, setting up his statue and sacrificing a pig in his honor. These actions precipitated the Maccabean revolt. Verse 12. And a host was given upon the continual in transgression, and it cast truth to the ground, and it wrought and prospered. In giving the above translation, I am merely setting forth what the text seems to mean. Thus, an host, that is, many of the Israelites, on account of transgression, that is, apostasy from God, will be given up, delivered up in transgression, together with, that is, thereon, at the same time, the continual sacrifices. Further, the horn cast down truth, that is, the objective truth manifested in the worship of God, to the ground, and prospered in his actions. Compare 1 Maccabees chapter 1 verses 43 to 52, verse 56 and verse 60 for the historical fulfillments. The length of this casting down is 2,300 days, chapter 8 verse 14, after which the sanctuary is cleansed. Kyle rightly interpreted this time, a little short of 6 years, to mean not quite the full judgment of God on Israel, which full judgment fell on AD 66 to 70 for their culminating apostasy. The apostasy and punishment under Antiochus are described as coming near the end of time, that is, the Old Testament era, chapter 8 verse 17. It will be a manifestation of God's, quote, indignation, end quote, chapter 8 verse 19, regarding Israel's apostasy. The, quote, transgressors, end quote, of chapter 8 verse 23 are the apostates and compromising Jews. Antiochus is raised up by God to punish Israel and is also thrown down by God. Chapter 8, verses 24 and 25. Broken without hand, without human agency. This vision, with its further statement of Israel's being set aside by God, had, for Daniel, the added horror of Israel's apostasy, with its hint of a culminating apostasy at the end, and it accordingly left him deeply disturbed and physically ill. Chapter 8, verses 26 and 27. What is the relationship of this little horn of the Old Testament era to that of the New Testament age, as depicted in chapter 7, verse 8 and verses 24 to 26? The comparison of either, both political figures, to Antichrist, a religious and ecclesiastical figure, is, as we have seen, incorrect. The Old Testament little horn, Antiochus Epiphanes, appeared as an offshoot of the three great empires, Babylon, Medo-Persia, and Macedonia, and their organic concept of kingship, of heaven on earth by means of this concept of continuity, which united heaven and earth. The, quote, little horn, end quote, of the New Testament age similarly comes after the fullness of the development of the Roman concept of the kingdom of man and represents its idea of world peace through world law, salvation by law, and continuity with the ultimate powers of creation by means of entrance into their potency through legality and law. Thus, this first is viewed from Shushan, from the high point of Oriental conception of the fulfillment of man, and the second from the perspective of Rome, the fourth monarchy, seen as power emanating from the fourth empire. Each is an end product. Each forces the issue to its ultimate implications, and both are destroyed by God. And, with the second, its destruction is made the beginning of the mature and open power of the true kingdom of God.